Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Welcome.
How you doing, everyone? My name is Michael.
I'm Tiffany.
And this is No Space Between Us. Yeah. See how we got that coordinated down? Worked out. This is a new podcast, and our goal is to help you work through the dynamics of your marriage. We've been married over 20 years, and it has not been a cakewalk.
No, it has not.
However, we've gone through some very tough challenges, and we believe that when God brings you through something, it's not for you to keep to yourself. It's for you to share, because I believe, and we believe, that the glory of God is always looking to be magnified. And I don't know where you stand on your belief systems, but we believe that we could not have gotten here without God.
Amen.
And so we want to just share with you tools and different strategies that we have used and are still using and are learning and are still learning that has helped us along our journey.
Okay.
All right, you want to jump in today?
Let's get to it.
All right, so today's message or today's podcast is surface level talk is killing your connection. Now, let me just say this. We also, at the end of this, you'll get a link where you can go and register and you can download the workbook. Every podcast will have its own workbook.
Yes.
And we design these workbooks as tools so that you guys can use them to help you work through the dynamics of your relationship.
Yes.
And you can use the topics. And we're going to kind of go through some of the workbook materials so that our audience could kind of understand how to use this, right? And the information that's in it. So, excuse me. Let's start out with the very principle that surface level talk is killing your connection. Proverbs 20:5 says, "The purposes of a person's heart are like deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out." That's the very basic scripture that we're using for this particular podcast, because what it speaks to is that there need to be some depth in your conversation with your spouse. And we're going to talk about the pitfalls, and we're going to talk about the strategy behind you having depth conversations and avoiding shallow conversations.
Yes, more depth, a little less surface level.
A little less surface level. That's the word we want to use, surface level. So let's talk about, can you define surface level talk versus depth level talk?
So surface level talk is minimum type conversation, minimum response, almost to the point where you do give short answers that maybe stop a conversation from even moving forward. And it's also less emotional engagement. Depth level conversations are more in depth, meaning that you're listening more. Before you respond to whatever it is that your spouse is telling you, you want to reflect on what your spouse has said, and then you want to ask questions to let your spouse know that I'm into this conversation. I'm feeling what you feeling, and whether you want to help or it's a solution that you're trying to help your partner solve, or it's just engaging in that moment.
So let's give some scenarios if you can. Let's deal with some real marital situations and give me an example of a surface level style of communicating in a marriage.
Okay. Well, let's say you're doing a daily check-in. Your spouse has been working all day. He or she comes into the house and you go, "Hey, babe, how was your day?" And your spouse go, "Fine." And they just continue to move through the house and, heading straight to taking off their shoes, taking off their coat. And you're trying to engage in a conversation with your spouse, but it's just real quick answers.
And we know that the dynamics of marriage, there are going to be situations, right, where you're not going to be willing to have those depth conversations, especially if you had a long day. Yes. And that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about just the habit of not engaging in these depth level conversations. And now give me the scenario where maybe that's just the opposite of that. You are willing to engage in an in-depth conversation with your spouse.
So now let's take that same example. Your spouse comes in, your spouse is like, what a day that I had. My boss, right at the very end of the day, gave me a last minute task that I had to finish out before I even left. It was such a crazy day. I'm just so tired. And your spouse is engaging and saying, okay, wow, what was the task that, your boss might have gave you? And you start to explain what your boss has done. Mm-hmm. Immediately, right there, your spouse is engaging in what you're saying. There's an emotional connection where that he's asking questions, asking about what task that your boss gave you, that, that last minute task, or, how you, so out of all of that, how were you feeling? That's a depth level response.
And we know that in these responses, it's not just about you giving a ton of information, right? These are opportunities for you and your spouse to learn more about each other. That's the reason why the in-depth communication style helps the marriage grow, because these are ways that you get to draw out, right, how your spouse is dealing with a day, how they deal with certain scenarios, how they deal with certain emotions. It allows you to connect with your partner in ways that you wouldn't have been able to connect had you not been able to hear or engage in these types of conversations. Yeah. And here's the thing, right? Because we live in a fast-paced world. Everything moves fast. But in this particular area, this is the time where you need to slow down.
Absolutely.
This is the time where you need to just pause everything and hear, engage, and get involved.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's so important to pause, meaning give your spouse eye contact. Body language is everything. Let your spouse know that I care about what you're saying right now. I care about how your day was. So whatever that I was doing before you got home, I'm going to just stop because it's okay. I can stop because I want to hear about your day and hear whether it was stressful or whether you had just a really good day. I want to hear about it.
So let's talk about this in a situation of conflict, when there's conflict in a marriage. And we may be in the middle of a heated fellowship. We had a disagreement. And then we're going to talk about a lot about some of the things we've gone through. Because this has been, every subject that we choose to talk about is a subject that we had to learn how to overcome. Yeah. It was a challenge in our relationship, a challenge in our marriage. And I know from a marital standpoint, and this is the road kind of like went back and forth for us, right? In the season where I was the one having a shallow conversation, tell me in conflict, let's first define how it shows up in conflict. Then I want you to explain how it impacted you when I had that shallow conversation. That surface level talk.
So it makes you feel vulnerable.
Well, let's give the example of the conflict first.
I'm sorry, jumping ahead. So let's say you all are having a conversation and it might be a heated discussion to the point where immediately your spouse is like, you know what, I don't want to talk about this no more. And he or she shuts down the conversation. Right then and there, you shut the conversation down where that it's not you're not even trying to give a solution to try to even repair the situation or the issue as far as
or
to whatever
or
address the issue as far as to what's going on in that issue, what's going on in that conversation, how can we solve it? You may or may not solve it that night, but you're not even given the opportunity to try to address a resolution.
So how did that impact you?
So it shuts you down. It makes you feel vulnerable because you're putting all of your emotions into it and you wanting to solve the problem, solve the issue, but your partner may not want to do it right then and there. Your partner is not even engaging in the conversation. And so it would make me feel vulnerable to the point where the next conversation or the next issue that we may have or might arise, I may not even want to address a resolution or to solve the problem because of the fact of how you shut me down.
And you become fatigued, right? Because you can only shut your partner down so many times before there become an anxiety behind that, right?
Yeah.
When we get into a conflict or something, your instinct now is just to walk away, you know, not even to deal with it, because you've been shut down so many times that there's an anxiety that if I approach him and I want to talk to him about this, all he's going to do is have a shallow talk. It's going to be a shallow conversation. It's going to be surface leveled, and we won't get to any depthness whatsoever. And then you're left with all that anxiety build up that goes unresolved.
Right. Those quick answers turn into, you have one person who wants to give more of an in-depth conversation, and the other person is giving more of just quick answers.
Okay. So now let's flip it and let's talk about in conflict when we deal with it from a depth level. I can say that, or we could even say just recently, having a conversation that was a point of contention, right? And we were talking through, but because we have learned to not let things go unresolved, we've learned that when we allow situations to sit, that it brings space, because our whole mantra for our marriage is no space between us.
That's right.
And so when you allow a conversation or you allow something that could potentially be a conflict in a marriage sit unresolved and not talk it through in depth to get to a resolution, that drives and that promotes space between you and your partner.
Mike and Tiffany just cracked this thing open. And if you thought that was good, part 2 goes even deeper. This is the end of part 1, but not the end of the series. Turn on notifications, don't miss what's next, because what's coming will bless you.